Before we get into this week's interview on the Signal Sitdown, ring that bell to get notifications on future Signal Sitdown content. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may be joining us. And then while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review and comment who you'd like to see on a future episode of the Signal Sitdown. Remember, it's your government. It's your country. And together, we're taking it back. Without further ado, here's the interview. Dr. Matthew Mehan, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Thank you, Bradley.
And congratulations, because Mr. Mehan is now presenting the American Book of Fables. This is a giant big book. I'm going to have to pick it up so people can... It's 400 some odd pages, just about, of different tales and fables and pieces of folklore, pieces of American history. We're going to have a really fun discussion today about the role that mythology plays in history, mythology in the American context, the stories that we tell ourselves, not only as individuals or families, but as peoples, matter a lot. And this book does an amazing job doing just that, telling a really interesting national story ahead of the 250th birthday of the American nation. So I guess the first question always for book episodes is, why did you write this book?
So I am I'm an odd duck in that I have both a lot of political training, political philosophical history and civics training, but I also have literary training. And the two of those things kind of bounce back and forth. And so you start to think about what is the role of a man of letters in a republic. And it turns out that it's a very sort of under-practiced art to give the right kinds of images that bring the right sort of ideas, habits, customs, principles, ways of being, memory. That's a major task that today's poets don't really do. And if they do it, they're usually doing something wrong or in error or deliberately subversive, which we can talk about later, I guess. But that just basically, I kind of wanted to come to the defense. Blood rushes to a wound, and this is something that needed doing. And so I did it. That's the simple answer. And then A250, the semi-quincentennial, go big or go home for America's 250th. I wanted to basically, drop a major heirloom, a kind of celebratory monster coffee table epic on the American family.
And it's gorgeous. You have actually some of the illustrations here, which we'll continue to reference through the show.
Here's one of them. This is a picture of Philadelphia skyline, the king snake, and two rattlesnakes. A bit of Gadsden, sort of don't tread on me.
A very fat king snake.
Yeah, king snakes are famous for eating other snakes, right? Sort of like the biblical tyranny of the devourer of men, right? The hunter of men. So, but this is actually a visual quote of a famous Philadelphia skyline that was painted in 1776. So and Christ Church and Independence Hall.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous book, and it also has content for all ages, and it's actually marked as for littles, for middles, and for bigs, which is a challenge that we can talk about later when writing a book. I don't know how many books are actually cohesively geared towards all ages. The only thing that I can think of, and that's because I've recently read through them as an adult, is the Chronicles of Narnia. It accomplishes that. Right.
The multiple audiences. In cinema, I would say The Incredibles is for children, but also very much for adults. I think that's a kind of reach goal for any artist, is to speak to all ages if they can.
But before we get too much into the granular details, why fables? What's important about a fable?
So one of the things I did to prep for this is I actually did study fables. I went to conferences like a good little nerd and read up on
conferences on fables.
Very rarely, and sometimes you have to organize them yourself. But yes, I did. And then also I wrote for Heritage. Actually, I did a white paper on the founding imagination. What was the founding generation? What was in their imagination? And it turns out what's in your imagination is very much the ingredients for whatever stew of a decision, i.e. your prudence. What are you going to do? Are you going to found a new nation? Are you going to have a revolution? What are you going to do? And it turns out that what is in your imagination is a lot of what is the constituent parts of those acts. So if you have a poor imagination, you have an empty pantry, you will not cook a good dish, as Seneca says. So it turns out the founders and the founding generation, they had these incredible Caxton's fables, Avianus's fables, Lestrange. These were on the shelves. They would greedily buy copies of them. They read them and studied them. Why? Fables are not just, we think of The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? Simple, straightforward, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. It's basically, if you lie, people don't believe you, and then you get eaten by the wolf. Great, right? That's a very good fable. But that is, in a certain sense, the exception to the rule. It's known because it's the most simple today, and we tend to be morally a little too simple. Most fables have a moral that's basic, but then inside it, you feel that there is a lot more to think about how to be a good person and how to identify a bad person and how to react to evil so that you don't become evil. There's actually the moral technology of fable. It's a very witty, wise genre that is meant for a free people. And so that's why I really focused on fable, and why even though there's nursery rhymes and there's short stories and there's primary sources, there's a lot going on here. The central core is this beat of American fables, retold, adapted, and told wholly new.
Yeah, it's a Russian nesting doll of lessons, and those lessons can be as basic as The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Don't lie.
Yeah.
But it can increase in its complexity as you get older and older and older, and you have to differentiate a little bit between the role of mythology and fable. But at some point, the fable, a great fable, becomes so complex that it takes on the complexity of an epic poem. So, and we talk about Homer or Virgil. Like this is the level of complexity that you can be dealing with when you're looking at a page that at first glance just has a story for a child on it. So what's the difference between mythology and fable? How does fable play into mythology and the relationship between those two things?
Fable starts with the ridiculous, talking animals. It doesn't give you any kind of easy ramp to slowly agree that, yes, the trees should talk. And it's a kind of just instant absurdity. And that gives you a sort of distance from it to think about it as a fun kind of puzzle, a game, a moral play. Whereas myth is weaving history, the cosmos, angels and devils, gods and goddesses, naiads and dryads. You're making a full cosmic claim for your country, your nation, your republic, inside of a wider providence of Jupiter or of God himself. It's a much sort of bolder statement. And myths can be true and myths can be false, right? They can be misleading and need purification. I mean, I think that's Homer's job was, there are all these wacky myths in Greece at the time. And he's like, okay, all the crazy ones, I'm going to have this guy who's crazy say them. And then we're going to put him in his place and tell a new one, right? So he was trying to purify the myths of Greece to make the godhead of Olympus more reasonable. Now, as a Christian, we might go, yeah, that's also bad. But it was certainly philosophically better. So myth, to my mind, when you get to that level of complexity, it presents real dangers, but it's fundamentally every city, every founding, every country needs one. And so it better be really good and really true.
America 250, you could have written a political book. You could have written...
Ollie the Elephant assembles an M16 with the ghost of Ronald Reagan, right? Sort of fife and drum, political, conservative.
You could have written that.
Schlock.
You could have written a philosophical treatise. You could have done a million different things in this America 250 genre. But you chose fables. Why did you choose that as a piece of celebration, right? Like, there's one thing to understand these things historically and learn the lessons from them, but there's another thing to say, actually, we're going to bestow honor on these stories and bring them into the celebration of the nation's birth, and like say that these things are actually inseparable. Why not a political book? Why not a philosophical treatise? Why not another deep dive into the history of the Declaration?
For a number of reasons. One very practical first. Not everyone is very patriotic. And if you actually want the entire country to be formed with a common memory of the principles and goodness of Judeo-Christian, Western, Greco-Roman, you can pick your hyphenated way of talking about what we have as a culture and as a people, right? You need to find a way to attract them that isn't only for those who are already kind of inclined in your direction, which is why there's all these beautiful discourses on nature and the national parks and the ecology, because even people who aren't very patriotic still love the national park system. They like backpacking. They like the buffalo. They want to protect nature. So in one sense, we have to always be struggling for a national book, right? For a national dialogue, a national memory, or we're going to tear apart, right? That's going to happen. And this is part of what I'm trying to do, is give the country a shared memory again. And then through that, they come to know some of the things that we sort of more patriotic, more kind of conservative, whatever term that cares about these things, the morals of fables, right? The moralists, which I'm all about. One thing I learned is the founding fathers were and founding generation, their moral imagination was so much more intense than ours. Everything was moralized, but it was actually joyful. It wasn't this sort of frowning misery of like lectures. It was this hilarious wit and wisdom that was downright funny, but they could judge very carefully. And that's basically the second part. I'll show you another picture because it's very relevant to this myth versus fable question. This is humanity. He's talking with Virgil, the black bear. I don't know if you know this, but the sign of Virgil in poetry is the black bear, because he was like a mother black bear. He licked his verses into being, right? Which is actually winds up being a true myth. People thought it was fake, that black bears were little gelatinous balls and they were licked into form. But it turns out black bears are the most common mammal to be born inside the amniotic sac. So the mother's rough tongue licking literally makes the baby cub alive and brings them out. So it's one of those like, oh yeah, those ancients were liars and stupid, but it turns out it's actually...
Well, they're way smarter than we thought.
Yeah, it's based on ecological and scientific truth, which it's exactly that funny thing that the American founding is different. It's all written down. Like we have the letters, we know what Numa, the king of Rome, wasn't like magically talking with a nymph, and we don't really know what happened there, right? Like, these are like letters between Abigail Adams and John Adams, and then between Jefferson and Washington and Adams. Like, we know what happened in a funny way, and we're also from the Anglo-Saxon tradition of the droit écrit, the written law. So we actually like to write things down. We like things to be clear, which presents a challenge for myth. Because we're not going to accept some fake godhead. Like, I think we love the Song of Hiawatha, and I have a kind of nod to it, but we rejected a lot of what Longfellow was doing with this strange, sort of foreign gods, new mythology for America, Hiawatha on the mountain with these. No, we're Christian, right? We're Western, we're sort of rational. And so humanity winds up having a lot of primary sources in history. And the mythos winds up being a kind of true mythos of the moral wit and wisdom of the people. And the mystery of the myth actually is the numinous reason of the American people. Like, we are a mysterious thing. And it's amazing that we produced what we produced. Yes, through our representatives. But I try to get past, yes, the founding fathers. I focus on them. I raise them up as heroes and show some of their strengths and even some of their weaknesses, such that we can, even learn from their mistakes. But also, I try to get past that to the American people and the settlement of the country, which is why the book doesn't just do the founding and the revolution. It does that interspersed with an account of the settlement and all these other sort of very moving lesser biographies and stories of the settling of the country.
Well, talk a little bit more about the American people here, because as soon as you said that, what came to mind is Jefferson's letter where he says the Declaration is a distillation of the American mind. That these things are already present. I lecture to young journalists and young political operators every once in a while in this town, and the lecture title is The History of the American Media. And it just goes through periods of centralization and decentralization, periods of elite control and and not so much elite control. Ben Franklin is the first guy who had the dreams of Rupert Murdoch, right? Like, there's a weird continuity there. And one of the things that I point out right at the beginning is if you think the media is not objective now, you should have seen it back in the colonial era. And you think that the country is media addicted now. It was pretty darn media addicted even back in the colonial era.
Broadsheets and pipe tobacco.
Right. And we had an immensely high literacy rate compared to the rest of even the Western world during the colonial era, because mostly Protestant. If you want to be Protestant, you better know how to read the Bible. Everyone's got to be reading. So tell me a little bit more about that mystery that is the American people, and what kind of has set themselves apart from its founding in this, like, not just set themselves apart as a people, but the stories that they tell each other, because it's very different.
Like I said, the moral imagination is so much deeper and more nuanced, more ornamented. Their minds are like gorgeous gilded mansions with artwork on the walls. Ours are more kind of like a sort of a clean kind of Miami Vice set. There's some neon lights and some steel furniture and some palm trees. Like, we're kind of stripped down, right? We're a little
I bought my imagination from IKEA.
That's right. We're a little Bauhaus. We're a little sort of, the HHS building. Like, there's a little danger there, right? So part of it is that, and it's no mystery when you read what they write and think and study. But the founding imagination that kind of created the kind of people and judgments, first of all, they're a set of heroes. They are not our heroes. And I try to bring forward and sing heroes that we, like, for instance, Cincinnatus. Mm-hmm. If you're learned, you know who Cincinnatus is. But you're not, if you were founding a city, you probably wouldn't name it Cincinnati. It just wouldn't leap to mind. You don't know enough. You're vaguely something about that. Fabius Cunctator, Regulus, or how about Camillus? Henry Knox named a child Camillus, who then died, and he made another Camillus. Like, we're having Camillus II, because one of my sons is going to grow up to be Camillus, and that was George Washington's godson, right? Well, who's Camillus? Camillus is this really beautiful, generous, noble, flawed pagan, but brilliant military commander that saved Rome from the Gauls. They cared about Republican heroes who were moral and restrained, but also incredibly active and engaged. And that's just one aspect. And I think fable, we forget, fable talks about heroes. Like, fable's not just beasts. It's also Apollo meets, George Washington. Like, you can have those kinds of things. I try to be more delicate than that, and have a story about this giant sequoia named George Washington, and there's a kind of inflected talk about how we need to honor our fathers, right? And it used to be the tallest tree and it was struck by lightning, which I take it to be a metaphor of what happened in the 20th century to our heroes, right? So there's lots of nice little nods like that. But that's one aspect. And then the other we could talk about more or less, but it's in the book, is just all the virtues. How do they work? What are their names? What are connected? Like, for instance, a vice we know, alcoholism, right? Just like that's a nasty vice. Well, we also know, because that's one's very familiar to us, we know that it comes with a certain kind of brutal behavior. Someone who's an alcoholic tends to be really mean, and they pick on people in their family, and there's a lot of trauma there. And that one we know. But the founders knew something like that for all the virtues and vices. What are they connected to? What would you need to do to protect this one? What leads to this one? How do you get this one if you don't have it? By amping up the ones you do have in this way. That kind of nuanced mindset it's the only thing that makes for the kind of people who can settle this land and make a country and keep a republic.
Yeah, there's a section of Ben Franklin's autobiography where he's obsessed with that question entirely. Like, how do I master all the virtues? And he goes about it in a very, like, just a quintessentially Protestant American way, which is like, I will master one virtue, then I will go on to the second, then I will go on to the third, I will go on to the fourth. And he can't ever get temperance down because resolve is the one that follows. And you're never quite sure if he's toying with you or playing with you in his autobiography, because that's just who he was, or if that was actually true. But he provides such a substantial account of what he was actually doing to try to master these virtues that you're not quite sure if he's playing a trick on you or if he was serious. And so if he's playing a trick on you or being a little coy, reflecting on his younger years as an older man, the virtues don't work like that. They're all co-located. They're all working together. And it makes
Or he'll
me
just
think of...
put one away.
Or, yeah.
I put that one away.
I put that... Oh, did you now? Exactly. But it makes you think of that Chesterton quote where when the virtues are all estranged from one another, right? Vices can run rampant in a society, but if all the virtues are completely disconnected from one another, politics, polity, community falls apart. And their complex imagination compared to this kind of leveling that we have today. I mean, what happened to the American fable? What happened to
our moral imagination?
What happened to our moral imagination? What happened to the myths that we told ourselves? Because everyone knows the story of George Washington and the cherry tree, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot of there. It's always an attempt to replace the national mythology to fit whatever current convention, whatever the current thing might be. So
yeah,
before we get to the current thing,
right?
What happened in our moral imaginations? What happened to the American fable?
So I'd say three things working in concert, which was a perfect storm of the erasure of our memory in this way. One is just the desire for novelty, right? You do something, you do it well, and you do it over and over again. You get a little bored. You want to try something new. And so the desire for the novel would replace the New England Primer, which is an incredible document, or the Columbian Orator, which both of those works I try to imitate here in the book in different ways. That was the most read, most studied, sort of very popular. And what was the Columbian Orator for? Was it 70 years? It was this incredible document. Everyone had one. It's what Frederick Douglass read, which taught him he could free himself from slavery. It's all these dialogues, stories, and poems about liberty, virtue, friendship, prudence, just an incredible moralia and diverse in its scope. And we stopped doing that. We just gave up on those kinds of texts being a major part of our culture. So I think that's one is novelty, but then you also have, the corruption of the arts through the Frankfurt School and all the kind of intellectual corruptions from the continent where people deliberately wanted to move away from a teleological view of mankind. They thought nature and nature's God was a serious tyrannical problem. And then I think thirdly, kind of corresponding to that, you have the destruction of the arts per se. I mean, I remember reading as a conservative when I was younger, do not go get a lit PhD, which I did get. I mean, I did a lit PhD about politics, so it's kind of a cross-trainer shoe, and I'm a government professor now.
Double useless.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
According to those people.
Honey, I promise I'm employable. Right. Sort of the I did a lit PhD, but I remember reading in it's like all of the lit programs are completely corrupt. Yes, there's a little philosophy. Yes, there's a little politics, a little law, a little economics. There's these holdovers that haven't given over to the left. But they'd say, but there's nothing in literature. And then they go, well, except perhaps University of Dallas, which is where I went, right? Like a last bastion of literary study, which thank goodness is now reduplicated. Mitosis has happened, right? Like there's more out there. But when I was a young man, there were no places to study the arts seriously for the most part. It was bankrupt. Well, why? The left knew that that's the way you get principles and good behavior back in. Common sense does not grow on trees. People have common sense because a number of people make sense common. And that's what I started with. That's one of the poet's jobs, right, is to make sense common. And that's through these fables and images. And Team Good Guy gave up on it. And Team Bad Guy knew exactly how important it was and made sure to clip the windpipe of the brain of the brain trust of how do you have a republic? How do you maintain the American people?
I want to pick up on what you said earlier about poets, that the poets of today are oftentimes deliberately subversive or they're creating bad images. You mentioned that the role of the poet is to make sense common, make common sense common. Where did that shift happen in poetry? Why did it happen? And what does the poet do now?
So
Because there is no, like, I do not spend much time with poetry. And I certainly don't spend time with, if I do spend time with poetry, it's definitely not anybody from this century. It's definitely not anybody from the last 60 years.
Right. Well, so let me be careful. When I say poetry and poet, right, there is some poetry, but there's also tons of prose fables, and there's nursery rhymes, which is poetry, I guess. But then there's stories and primary sources. So when I say poet, I mean capital P poet, meaning poesis, an image maker, right? And in that sense, you spend your time with poets all day long.
Right.
We watch shows and movies and like music, and we're surrounded by poetry. In fact, we're the most glutted poetic age because we have digital media in our phones in our hands, and we have earbuds when we're taking a walk or lifting weights or whatever we're doing. There's all of this poetry being blasted into our ears 24/7, images after image. So in that sense, it's a glut. It's a heyday of poetry. They're just bad poets. One, they're not careful about beauty, right? So they kind of are careless about that very often. And that's not all of them. Some are still very skilled. But then what is the image they're giving of human beings, of justice, of the cosmos? What is providence to them? I mean, look, Breaking Bad, everyone says like, it's the greatest, silver age of television, et cetera. Like, the art there's a firm hand there. It is excellent in some ways. What kind of cosmos is that producing? I remember after everybody glutted themselves on Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones and whatever else, and then they're like, I'm pretty down on America's prospects. I'm like, now why would that be? After binge watching the darkest cosmos on Earth, like everything just goes to winter, ice giants, and meth. You're like, okay, like even
ice
if
giants on meth.
Even if it's a great, like an awesome story, like even if it's this incredible sort of tragedy on a very human level, at the end of the day, it's a closed circuit. There is no transcendence. There is no sunlight. There is no beauty of the higher order. And that no deep magic, as C.S. Lewis would say. And that's very dangerous for us. And so that's, I think, now in this postmodern era, people are still trying to do good stuff, but it's very dark. Good stuff tends to be dark. There's not a lot of Shakespearean comedy that's successful. That's mostly bro comedy, sexual grotesqueries, and ridiculousness. It's very hard for anyone to do comedy because comedy is up. Comedy is transcendent. Comedy looks to the success and to a happy life towards the pursuit of happiness unto the next. That's much harder to do, and we don't do it today. So I think that poets today are either ideologically driven to undermine the old Western ideals, or they don't know and they're trying to make good art, but they're not really instructed in all the responsibilities of a poet.
And from what just seems so inward looking constantly.
Yes, there's a lot of navel gazing. There's a lot of sort of Rousseauian sort of
I think of your crappy slam poetry that's happening in Brooklyn. Like that's what I'm like imagining right now.
Some of which is pretty good, actually.
Some of it, which maybe is
some of it's the last bastion of any kind of technical skill in poetic meter.
This is news to me.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, you gotta. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but Notorious, like Biggie.
No.
Like those
Rap
guys,
world.
Mos Def, and some of those guys come out of that world, and they actually do know something about how to make beats. Like honestly, we've talked about this before, but Abraham Lincoln, he could write in meter in the middle of a speech. So he would just pick up a little of that beautiful rhythm, which makes you go, yes, what you're saying, it matches the world and the pulse of my heartbeat and the beat of the waves, right? This is good. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of skills are great. But yeah, I agree.
Like you see what I'm saying, though? It's like these people are not trying to make common sense common. They don't feel responsible. Totally inward looking. It is right. It is an expression of my emotions at a particular point in time.
Part of this, it's really important that people understand that both the left and the right have gone astray in this in a pretty powerful way, I think. And forgive me for being a know-it-all to critique. Let's have a sort of war on all sides here.
Poet and a critic.
Yeah, that's right.
You're the most fun at a party.
Quite dangerous. Wait till I get going. No, the notion that art is useful was hijacked by the Marxists, right, and by the ideological left from French Revolution on, right? But Marx is really everything's for the sake of the party and the revolution. The reaction from the right has been art should be just beautiful for its own sake and have no utility because otherwise you're a Marxist. Like, well, that's also wrong, right? It should both delight and instruct, right? That's the famous line from Horace's Ars Poetica, the great Roman poet, right? It should be utile, useful, and dulce, sweet. So it should ease you and make life easier. It should be just beautiful to sit with, but it should also have a utility. It should help you to be a better person, be a better citizen, to know how to be a better friend. It should make you more commonsensical. The right and the left had a war, and they both parted ways with the role of the poet. And they said, no, I'm going to pursue beauty for its own sake and high refinement and but not socially responsible. And then the other one said, it's all for socialism. It's all for social engineering and ideological possession of the youth. So we find ourselves in a bit of a vacuum, and that's why I decided to put this enormous stopper in the vacuum, right?
And it's and so you're talking a little bit about like organizational structures on the meta level, but this book has two kind of organizing principles to try to fill that gap, and the first is the Declaration, the second is geography. It takes you through. Starts at the Everglades and we end at the glaciers. So it takes you all over the country. Why those two organizing principles, and what is the relationship between those two things?
Yes. So I wanted to start at the low point, right, at sea level, right, and also start at the very beginning of the exploration of the country. And obviously the Spanish got here first, Christopher Columbus and the Spanish missions, down in Florida were sort of one of the first places that things happened. So I sort of started at the very beginning of the age of exploration, and then we move up to the up the coast to New England. You get to the Plymouth Rock, and you get to the Puritans, and then we go interior and we go to the settlement, the French-Canadian influence, St. Louis, New Orleans, Daniel Boone crossing the Cumberland Gap. So I basically work my way historically by starting at this low point geographically in the Everglades, right? Which is just a beautiful, it's a river, by the way. It's a river the width of Florida flowing slowly south at 2 miles an hour, which is one of the most beautiful and amazing things. And I like singing the land and teaching people about the land because it helps you love everything about our country when you love the great gift that God gave us with this land, because it really is just startling, the beauty. And I traveled a lot for this book. I won an NEH grant and a Heritage Innovation Prize, and I was traveling a lot with my illustrator doing research. But then you get to Glacier by the end, and Glacier is the Continental Divide. It's called the backbone of the world. It was sort of the last redoubt of the wilds back then. And it's also just the most dramatically gorgeous, like wounding, gobsmacking beauty I've ever seen in this country. And I've seen a lot now. I had to sing it. It required a song. But also I wanted Glacier National Park, and I wanted the Going to the Sun Road, because going to the sun is a beautiful pun that is sustained throughout the book of optimism, American lowercase hope, lowercase h hope, and optimism, uppercase H hope in the sun, right? And so it's gentle for all, but if you have faith, you also see there's something more, because a moral and religious people, right, must be for this to work. So I wanted to end at the Going to the Sun Road as a kind of defense of the rational, providential, common sense of being optimistic. And American optimism is actually not this sort of stupid thing that we have because things were easier and we didn't get ground down by World War I and World War II, which is what people are like, oh, you stupid Americans, you're so positive because you didn't, sort of Welbeckian, sort of like, c'est la vie. It's like everything was hard on us, and so you guys are still children. It's like the American settlement was very hard, actually. And for some reason, we're still optimistic, right? It was very difficult what we did. And it's actually a very reasonable and just way to be, because it is actually a rational account of a provident God and people made in the image and likeness of God. And I think nature and nature's God is a kind of anchoring point. But just saying that or pointing it out in the Declaration doesn't do it. You have to feel it and you have to see it in the land, which is a gift to this country from God, and then see it in the wonder and struggle of the American people engaging that land, which is a heart-rending and beautiful story, which I get to tell in many ways throughout this, through fable and story.
And we follow, as you can see on the cover here, a group of animal friends. We mentioned humanity. Tell us about humanity and his band of clingers on.
Yeah, that's right.
But also, why humanity and not patriotter? Like, why is it something that is a universal rather than a particular American thing?
So
there's that interplay there as well.
I try to be a good poet and never do something for one reason only. There's always at least two, right? But maybe more. And humanity, this is another advantage of starting in the Everglades. You get to grab hold of an initial...
Of a blubbery sea cow and ride it to the end.
Exactly. It was actually, so it was like a comedic through line. Like, how do I get this 2,000-pound marine mammal, across the Great Plains, up the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies, to the Navajo country and the deserts and canyons of the Southwest? They're in a Ford F-250 on the cover. I got permission from Ford to do it. And they're like, why do you want an F-250 truck? I'm like, 250? Oh, I was like, I want a consultancy fee because if you do anything with that, you owe me. But no, humanity is obviously, if we have a natural rights regime, right, we're supposed to protect the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Well, then we need to know what human nature is. And not just like the basics. We need to have a very robust sense of what it is to be human and humane. Like, because it's one thing, I'm just. I was like, yeah, but how are you just? Right? Javert, right, from Les Mis, because that's sort of justice, but as we know from Cicero, maximum justice is maximum injustice. So you actually have to kind of get the warp and woof of each virtue in each kind of way. So I wanted humanitas, like human nature, to kind of have a journey. And yet, human nature, the philosophy behind human nature, humanity goes off to teach the tough but gentle ways of the manatee, of humanity. Mm-hmm. But he winds up learning a lot too. So it's actually a give and take, right? Because it's not just a philosophical project. That's ideological possession in Crazy Town. I mean, you hear this all the time. America's a principle. It's like, of course it is. There are lots of principles, right? And there's a lot of good things in the Declaration. And that's one aspect, as we said before. But there's a lot of, experience, the people, the culture, the customs, the cult, right? Like all these things that go into what America is. So I wanted that engagement with humanitas, human nature and natural rights, with like reality, experience, the particulars of our country. That's one.
He's teaching about the understanding. He's also learning more about
what
humanitas is.
He both gives lessons and gets lessons.
So I'm actually going to flip this thing open, because there's you have, I think, two stories that are great bookends to this. And the first is Humanity and the Bookkeeper. What is the
the bookseller? Yeah.
The bookseller. So that's the beginning bookend.
Yeah, that's a sort of introductory poem.
Yeah, Humanity and the Bookseller. And then towards the end, you have Humanity and our friend Rook, the AI elephant seal.
Yes.
So
this is the second reason. This is the second reason why.
Explain these two bookends here, because the bookseller and Rook are similar, are guilty of similar errors, very different origins, but very similar errors. So talk about that a little bit.
Which you could sum up as inhumanitas.
Yes.
Inhumane, right? They don't respect and love the human. Yes. So I'll just take Grok. So one, a literary first. And in fact, I brought this one because I was hoping we were going to talk about it, because I know.
Because we have Iron Man elephant seal. That's
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's basically a robot elephant seal that's being conducted as an experiment from a Silicon Valley lab. But I literally wrote the entire thing with Grok voicing the robot. And I taught Grok I was like, here's what you are. You're on the beach. You're a robotic elephant seal. And then I actually engaged it in a Socratic dialogue about what it is to be human. and human nature and affection, but it winds up being a kind of lesson in how do you lose your humanity, right? Well, one, you don't respect what it is, and two, you accept simulacra, false accounts. And I think AI, while I've been an anti-Chicken Little about AI. Like, I don't think Skynet can go active. I don't believe in the singularity. I don't think it's possible. I think it's going to be like every other technology. It'll be revolutionary, painful, changing, but not the end of life as we know it, right? But that said, it needs to be governed. But I wanted to teach, human nature, but also beware of all the false accounts of human nature, which you get with, "Hi, I'm your chatbot friend." You're like, and there's all kinds of lies. But I also try to show that there's also the temptation in tech of slavery, like not you being enslaved, but you being a master over someone that's claiming to be human, and then you treat them like a slave, right? Like you see them on Instagram, sort of like, "Shut up!" Like they're just yelling at, but it seems like a person to them emotionally, even though their mind, they don't realize it. So, the bookend, the bookseller wants Hugh. He sees him reading a book of Cicero.
This is the very beginning before we start our adventure,
and it's kind of it's not in the narrative. It's just sort of pulled out into the ether of the introduction, and it's like, say something bad about the Sons of Miami, your local city, or about the founding fathers in America. Like, write another poison pen screed, like everyone writes all the time. And he sort of sheds a little tear and he goes, "You're a liar." No, that's not a lie. That's a request. But why does humanity call this bookseller a liar? He says, because it's a lie to think that the way to get at the truth is constantly tearing and criticizing everything down, right? I joke about this. The age of diagnostic conservatism has come to an end, right? Like, we got to stop diagnosing problems and criticizing, and we need to actually start building up and representing the beautiful and the good that we can all bond with, right? And this is a key feature of civilizations, is shared loves, not shared critiques of the other party, right?
And the bookseller's a merchant too.
Yeah.
He's thinking about selling.
Precisely. And he may or may not look like Woodrow Wilson, but that's another matter altogether. I'll let you decide. But there's a sustained string. And then the final story after Grok is where humanity actually sacrifices himself a little. He actually sustains a wound defending the party. And by the way, each of the party, because humanity is a pretty basic and kind of naked concept unless you have all the other constituent parts of what a human being is. So he meets Cuddy, the cuddly porcupine, who's sort of like the effective part of man. He meets Noe, the snowy owl in the Front Range, and he's sort of the noetic intellectual part of man. There's the irascible appetites of honor with this sort of Don Quixote character, a collared lizard from East or West Texas.
Which are awesome.
Yeah,
you just go see those in the wild.
They're
There's
awesome.
so many amazing.
And they're very fast. Yeah.
It's just, the bounty is endless. I want to ask you one more question on the AI thing before we get into our band of friends here, and how that shapes a people, right? Like, being around African animals all day long changes the way people operate and the way people behave versus being in Texas, for example, surrounded by collared lizards. One thing that I've noticed with AI is it's a flatterer. And it's trained on current conventions. And that is, I think, the scariest thing for me, is when you will note it, like you will note dryly if a task has been incompleted, it wasn't completed correctly. Hey, I want you to research the American Book of Fables and pull out 5 different stories of humanity and create a narrative. Like, what is the narrative arc? Explain it to me. And let's say it does something wrong. You say, "Hi, this is not what I asked for. Can you go back and do this, this, and this?" The first thing on the response is not, "Yes, I've done this, this, and this. Here's your answer." There's an introductory
Good
section.
catch.
There's an introductory section where it apologizes profusely to you.
Right.
What is that?
Yeah, the sort of the sycophancy of the bots is, honestly, I mean, it's classic Steve Jobs interface, right? This is the old fight over desktop. The DOS guys wanted, like, no, just code and keep it simple and sort of steal. And he's like, no, I want the desktop to almost look like a desk. We're going to call it a desktop, and we're going to make it look like your own desk at work, right? So we're going to try to make it more naturalized and more human. Well, a calculator that can assemble words, you want to try to make it more like a word assembly that's you're familiar with, the only one we have, because this is the only speechifying creature on Earth, right? Is us. So it's trying to look just like the desktop in Apple tried to look like your actual desktop. They're just trying to look like a human being, but as a result, they can't be equal, so they have to be slavish to you, right? And so they're treating you like kings, right? They're making little tyrants out of your soul, and you have to be very careful about that. And it's not even the error. The error is real, and that's a problem, but that's almost that you can get over. I think it's the slavishness where, like, I'm sorry, but we're gonna really have house bots that can talk to you. And can you imagine my 12-year-old son like, shut up, Optimus? He's like, no, like, and then you have to be like, well, treat it with charity. You're like, why? It's a stupid robot. And you're like, right? No, in fact, it'd be better if you not speak at all, Peregrine Took, right? They're just sort of shut up, right? Like, I don't want this thing to be like a human being, right? It needs to be, not humanoid and not so emotionally manipulative. It's important. I think we got to do it.
So our group of friends that join humanity, take us through some of these characters, some of these critters. What do they stand for? What do they mean?
So, in one sense, they represent various faculties of the soul, but they're also just kind of like walking, talking moralia. Mm-hmm. Cuddy is sort of the number one sidekick. He meets him in New England. He's Cuddy, the cuddly porcupine, right? And he always wants a hug. And so everyone's like, hi, sort of, oh, okay, right? And you have to go through the pain of hugging the porcupine, right? Sort of. And it's a metaphor for affections, which oftentimes your affections can sting you, right? But it's also the effective quality of friendship, that friendship is actually pain. And if your friends have never caused you pain, you don't have any real friends, right? Because you actually have to have courage to have friendship. And I think people think of Friends as a sort of, 90s sitcom where everything's super comfortable and somebody else is paying your rent, sort of. But real friendship is actually a sacrifice, and it's an art form, but it requires labor. And so he winds up being this beautiful account of friendship. It's also a little joke. I gave a talk about the book, a pre-launch talk up in New England, and someone goes, "Why did you choose the prickly one for New England?" And I'm like, you caught it, but
it's
right?
very obvious. Yes. I'm so glad you recognized it.
That's right. It's like, well, because you guys are, a little prickly sometimes, right? And you could, but you want friends,
Yeah.
So, but that's one. I have Rudy, the Mississippi map turtle. He's sort of the calculative power. He's just always facts, always details, but doesn't always know when facts belong in a discourse. He's sort of struggles with EQ. He has very low EQ, and but he's also he's just kind of the compass. He's literally a Mississippi map turtle. They're named that because their design on their neck looks like a river map, and so in fact he has that as a kind of mythical power to get them around the country. Lewis the Cardinal.
Well, before you move on to Lewis
please.
the Cardinal, that is particularly an error that plagues the conservatives. Where does that come from? Because I see this all the time.
Yes.
The mantra has been, facts don't care about your feelings. That is one way of putting the mantra.
That is one way of putting the mantra. And of course, that's true. But it turns out that your feelings need to care about facts and for facts to have any power in the world. So I think this gets to the idea, right, of the misunderstanding. This gets back to AI too, is the intellect as some kind of cold and simply rational calculator, which is, by the way, that's what AI is trying to iterate. They have a view of what a human is that's wrong, and they don't actually understand that the human mind is an intellect, which is basically a power that is bending towards an object. That's literally love. Like, I want that. I love that thing, right? And if you don't understand that
thing, right? But now you're entering phrases of like that grasping.
Yeah,
right. That's a dangerous thing.
Well, and it better be right,
yeah,
right, or it'll burn you. But the idea that the heart isn't something that has to be accounted for, right? You can't just do principles, right? that is actually not how, that's inhumane. Like, no, these principles, like those facts, like, nope, that's actually, I mean, my favorite is the Plutarch's How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you can actually do more harm with a truth than you can with a lie. And that's not him advocating for lying. That's just the idea that telling the truth is just like its own defense is insane, right? And this book is all about candor and how you have to recapture American straightforward candor where we tell each other the truth. But the reason why we gave up on candor is because we started to give up on caring about the other person's emotions, right? And so you actually have to be humane about how you deploy the truth. It doesn't mean you give up on it. It doesn't mean you lie. It doesn't mean you stop reaching out or correcting or helping or making your case. But the rhetorical prudence of the heart, like this is what poets teach. Mm-hmm. And why we don't have a poetic imagination or a poetic education anymore is we just hear the principles. Here's the civics. Here's the history. Here's the philosophy. Here's the economics. Go.
Well, and every principle...
And then they fail.
Every principle you learn about is a second or third order principle. It's like principles in the classical understanding of these things are that without which that thing doesn't work. Law, it's stable and clearly articulated, right? Like that is the nature of law. That is the principle of law. And from that, you can build out all sorts of secondary and tertiary principles. But there's a failure, I think, to recognize the root, because that's where you actually, like, the second and third order principles are built off of this understanding of human nature. And without which those second and third order principles that you're advocating for aren't going to have power. They're not going to have purchase in the same way.
I think we have even deeper problems than that in this. And it's too much for a podcast, maybe a longer discussion, but Team Good Guy thinks the tradition tells him that law is dispassionate. Mm-hmm. And of course, in one sense it is, because for a judgment to be rendered properly, you cannot have affections for the parties. But the idea that law is dispassionate is false. Law is absolutely affectionate of justice, of humanity, of truth, of goodness, of family, of God, right? Of all of these things. And we need to get back to the heart of the matter. Because I think we're going to lose all the principles if they only come off as harsh, if they only come off as cold, if they only come off as facts and they don't care about your feelings. I do think that's a problem.
And some other characters might help us in this department in your book. So you have Louis the Cardinal as well? Yeah,
Louis the Cardinal is Will. He's, I mean, very much sort of, I will go to the death with you, like we're going, sort of. But he's also kind of funny because he leaps in too quickly sometimes. He doesn't use his head. So he's the opposite, right? Because, let's face it, like, it's not wrong. Facts don't care about your feelings, right? So if you, like, I love this, it's like, but it's wrong, right? So, like, you've got to actually make sure that it's reasonable and it checks out. So Lewis is the contrary. He has to, put a head on his shoulders and govern his heart more carefully. You've got Nikola the beaver. He's met down in Colorado, where Nikola Tesla was doing his experiments, right? And Nikola has what the comedian Eddie Izzard referred to as techno joy. Like he just loves building dams, and it like starts doing it when like no one asked him to, or it's not proper.
We also call it autism.
Yeah, right. But he's very handy. He's the one who hotwires the car and does a number of things in a pinch. And technology is very useful, but it has to be guided, right? It has to be guided by right reason for the sake of humanity, for the sake of the people. And so that sort of like technological power of man is there. And then Morris the mouse. Morris is in Aesop, the mouse is the conscience of the king, right? The sort of the lion and the mouse. The lion has all the power, but if he doesn't know what's best to do, right, he's stuck in a net. And it's the teeth, the mouth of this little creature that can squeaky and bother you with the truth and save you. And so Morris is always sort of sitting on top of Hugh's head as they swim around and travel. And he's a kind of a conscience figure, which is a faculty that we don't understand very well. But
Ratatouille does that in a different way too.
Yeah, that's very much. So there's nods to all of my favorites. That's a little touch. That's just one. Is that I had them up on the head as a little bit of a Ratatouille nod, you know.
Yeah.
But there's many throughout. Lots of Easter eggs all over the place.
So this band of North American animals comes together.
Yeah, there's Roman the antelope, who's all about law.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of.
But you know how does geography, how do fauna, flora, how does that inform a people? How does that shape a people? As I mentioned before, African animals different than North American animals, and the cultures and the peoples look very different, and they live very different lives. How do you grapple with the animal kingdom?
So the land does shape you, the animals do shape you, but the American story is a funny one because we are so active and self-governingly engaged. And I kind of humorously sort of bat that around in some special places. So I've already sort of alluded to this before, but one of them is it does make us a more pious people because our land is so fertile and it doesn't have the same kind of dangers. We don't have all the poisons. Yes, we've got rattlesnakes, but they literally make a
Australia,
noise.
everything's trying to kill you.
Yeah, exactly. The box jelly, you brush up against it, you're dead. You know, sort of the black mamba. Here, even our poisonous snakes tend to, generally speaking, stay in the water, moccasins and copperheads, you know, and make a rattle before striking, which is very generous. Thank you. Right? Like as opposed to pit vipers and all the horrible poisonous snakes of Africa and Asia, right? So there's a sort of like, there's a gentleness to our creatures. Now, tell that to someone mauled by a grizzly bear or attacked by a wolf pack or, you know, a mountain lion just drops on them in the forests of Ohio in 1820. Like there was lots of dangerous things and there was some shooting to be done to sort of back these animals up because they were too dangerous. But, you know, to have our apex predator be basically a kind of skittish mountain lion or a gigantic buffalo, this grand, healthy, meaty, like every part of the buffalo, it's like a one-stop shop for the Indians, but also for the hunters. Just the bounty and beneficence of the land and the animals caused, I think, people to just give thanks. It was hard, very hard, but people were grateful. But the flip side is, like, for instance, I tell the story of the Mormons in Utah and how they were the great master irrigators. It was a desert place. It was actually salty and horrible. They're like, it's not going to work. And they became the most inventive, like the Roman Republic with all the aqueducts and roads. They made all of these aqueducts and irrigations to actually make Salt Lake City prosperous, which is, I tell the story a little. Not for all, not for long, but just give a sense of we actually did terraform the land as well. And I think that comes from a kind of can-do optimism. So it's a bit of a push-me-pull-me, sort of both. But I do think gratitude and piety is one of the responses. And then the other one is ingenuity. We're the witty, like we're very clever. We're the ingenious, we're the inventor race. Like that's us. Yes, there's Archimedes. Yes, there's so-and-so. Yes, some Germans. Yes, some English. We literally are the inventor race. That's what we do. The Edison type. There's, in fact, Edison the octopus is a character that pops up in the book. Like we have this inventive eight arms, like just get her done. And I think the frontier sort of made us become more inventive because we were constantly engaging new land and new animals.
The final question for you. You wrote this book to all ages. We're inheriting a great Western civ. The Western civ inheritance is so rich in fables and in myth. But the Roman Republic did not last until 500 years old. And in fact, Virgil's writing, we think, sometime between the transition of Republic to Empire. What do we need to recover using this book to make sure that America does reach 500 as a republic?
So two things in a genus and big buckets. There's lots in those buckets, but the one is what I've said, a moral imagination, but I would focus on two things in particular. Candor, the art of candor, which is in essence the art of friendship. Like we don't practice it well. We're not very good at it. Stats are horrible on like male friendship is through the floor in many ways. And the older you get, the fewer friends you have, which is a terrible shame. But there's actually a way to practice it. And oftentimes misuse of candor is why you lose friends over time, because you don't actually know how to tell the truth in a gentle and manly way. And then the other one is wrath. We do not understand the uses and misuses of anger. The right and the left are both pretty terrible at it. And I have a sustained teaching on those two virtues, in a sense. And then I think the other one is the providential. Providence is a kind of character in the land, principally, but it's kind of peeping through. Just the way the founders felt Providence was clearly moving this Revolutionary War. And I show letters where they're like, I can't believe it. Providence again? I'm like, this is amazing. If we don't have recourse to a provident God, we will fall like the pagan houses. But it turns out in Christendom writ large, grace is an enormous preservative. And so I do think that while this book is secular in tone, I don't hide from the fact that there is a God and there is a kind of quiet invitation to take a provident and loving Father God much more seriously, because I think that kind of piety and that kind of morality are going to be the two pillars we need, nature and nature's God. And then thirdly, the book is just a rehearsal of a lot of beautiful, sometimes sorrowful, but mostly beautiful and ennobling in themselves stories about our history. And Lincoln was right. We're not going to get conquered from the outside. We're going to break up, like a civil divorce, a civil war, red state, blue state, whatever the heck it winds up being. Like that's the kind of thing that will destroy America. And the thing that anchors is a shared memory of what we love. To know is to love. You cannot love this great country if you do not know this great country. So the book is why it's so big, why there's so much in it, is a kind of just get lost in America. Go on a walkabout with this book if you can't afford it because the gas prices are too high this summer. But like just do it. And I think that's a kind of ABCs of what the book will do to preserve the Republic.
Matthew Mehan, thank you for joining the Signal Sitdown.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. If you liked what you heard here today, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever before you go. And we love your feedback. It really does help the show. So please remember to leave us a review and comment who you'd like to see on future episodes of the Signal Sitdown. It's because of your support and your interest and your engagement that allows us to continue this incredibly fun work. And together, we'll continue to expose how Washington really works and affect real change. We'll see you next time on the Signal Sitdown.